Hey my fellow friendsets, it's Chris from Shughead Gaming, and here's my review for VEN VR Adventure, developed and published by Monologic Games and released December 17th, 2020, exclusive to the Oculus Store for PCVR headsets, with a planned release on Steam, Quest, and PSVR in the first half of 2021. VR Adventure retails for an estimated price of $30, but of course that depends on your region. Submerge yourself in a world of magic, adventure, and platforming action as you take control of VEN in this made-for-VR 3D platformer. With not much competition in this genre of game for VR, Astro Bot has stood tall as the defining benchmark. But stick with me while I put it through its paces and see how VEN compares to the unofficial PSVR mascots last outing. As always guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button. It not only helps out my channel, but VR gaming as a whole. And if you'd like to see more VR content from me, please consider subscribing. And for video updates, you guys know the deal, hit that bell icon. Okay, let's talk graphics. Wearing its influences squarely on its sleeve, Monologic certainly isn't ashamed to borrow from the best when finding its art style. Borrowing heavily from Naughty Dog's previous contributions to the 3D platforming genre, VEN VR Adventure at times screams Crash Bandicoot, and to a lesser extent Jak and Daxter, with the former obviously having a huge influence not only in art style but also embracing Crash's forward-moving, almost corridor approach to the genre. Hell, at times it's straight up copied certain memorable parts of the Crash universe. And while this often means VEN struggles to find its own identity, it is a ridiculously, deliciously good-looking game that is straight up VR eye candy and is really not done justice by the game footage you see now, as the scale and immersiveness is just lost. Again, borrowing from Crash Bandicoot's almost oil-painted meets Pixar style, the world here absolutely pops in the headset as you look down upon the well-designed labyrinth of obstacles in front of you. Even on lower settings, VEN is a beautiful game with a vibrant color, nice textures, and a sheer level of polish you would expect from a top-tier 3D platformer in flat gaming. That being said, despite the gain in resolution on the PC hardware, VEN still never reaches the same quality of Astro Bot, with some low-poly enemies, fixed shadow effects, and the static backgrounds off in the distance that, while not horrible, really would have benefited from some sort of animation to liven them up and remove the slightly cardboard backdrop feeling. Level variety, visually speaking, is something Monologic has nailed though, ensuring each of the game's 12 stages look and feel different from all the others. Not surprisingly, the game hits all the tried and true platform locales such as jungles, ruins, sci-fi, ice caverns, factory stages, sky levels. You guys get the point. And of course, these are in VR and sprawling all around you. Although while VEN VR Adventure certainly does take advantage of the scale and depth of VR, it's hard not to think back to the moments in Astro Bot where the world was literally growing and changing around me, and sometimes because of me. One thing that made Astro Bot such a masterpiece was the way in which it fully embraced the capabilities of VR and gave you experiences you could have only previously dreamed of. Unfortunately, VEN rarely pushes these boundaries of imagination though, and is often content with just having you as a passenger in the world, controlling VEN from an almost godlike perspective. This doesn't mean there weren't some epic moments here where VEN and I literally met face to face, but these were far and few between. Speaking of face-to-face, VEN himself looks amazing and animates beautifully. Design-wise, he does come off like a mishmash of Crash, Daxter, and Sonic, but he lacks the personality and charm of all three, due largely to the fact that he doesn't speak and besides only a few animations, does little to really interact or endear himself to the player. As a result, VEN often feels like an underdeveloped shell of what could have been, a problem that seems to plague the game as its main protagonist and world lore is simply cookie-cutter stuff. And while I realize this begins to tread outside of simply the visuals, I think it all starts there. Regardless, VEN VR Adventure is a visually stunning VR game, even if it does have a bit of an identity problem. Sound is up next. I've always stated that 3D platformers are gamer comfort food. They may not be the most deep and complex games, but they are often games that are aimed at simply being feel-good entertainment for all ages. VEN VR Adventure is certainly that, and a large part of that is due to its excellent soundscape. What jumped out at me the most is the music here in VEN. Each level has its own symphonic theme and flavor, ranging from such things as smaller tribal-themed tunes to epic scores that sound like they were pulled right out of a blockbuster movie. Regardless of level though, the music remained fun and light, complementing the platforming action very nicely. My only complaint really would be much the same as the visuals, as VEN really lacks any memorable music moments that musically define him. One thought about Mario, Sonic, Crash, Banjo, or the more comparable Astro Bot, and I bet at least one memorable tune comes to mind. Unfortunately, VEN never really succeeds at this, and as such sounds competent but lacks a musical identity. As VEN swirls, slices, and butt stomps his way across the levels, everything just feels right. Unfortunately though, VEN himself is voiceless, saying basically nothing throughout his travels, with only the odd ugh when hit. This lack of character on the sound side of things is compounded by his lack of personality on the visual side of things, and results in a cool little mascot that I really had zero relationship with. Voice work of what there is of the rather forgettable villain and a few other characters is done very well, so it's a shame that VEN himself and the aforementioned villain come off so bland. Regardless, VEN VR Adventure's audio design, like the visuals, is first rate across the board, but still fails to find its own voice. Okay, so that brings us to gameplay. Prior to Robot Rescue, a VR minigame found on the PS4 for the PSVR, I would never have thought of a 3D platform title really working in VR. A few years later, Astro Bot Rescue Mission released, taking that minigame and blowing it wide open into a standalone title that brought gamers right into the world of a 3D platformer, then asked them to literally be a part of it. Often outdoing Nintendo at their own game, Astro Bot was something very special and forever changed 3D platforming. Unfortunately, though, despite the success of Astro Bot, there really hasn't been a concerted effort to create a VR game in the platformer genre. That was until VEN VR Adventure, a game that certainly scratches that Astro itch, but for those who have actually had the pleasure of playing Astro, it might come off a little wanting. Control-wise, VEN is absolutely spot on. Using the two motion controllers, you are situated in front of the level, controlling VEN's every move in the same fashion as you would with any 3D platformer. With the left analog stick and two face buttons on the right controller, you will run, jump, slash, and butt slam with the best of them, and it feels responsive, polished, and well, exactly like you want it to, meaning playing VEN is fun. Over the course of 3 worlds and 12 levels, not counting the unlocked bonus stages, your primary mission is to not only get VEN to the end of each level, but do so while collecting an assortment of things, because it wouldn't be a platformer if it wasn't, at its core, a giant collectathon. As such, you will be collecting blue shards that act like coins in Mario. These can be tracked on your left wrist and levels up a blue bar that indicates how close you are to gaining a new life. In addition, you will also be collecting boxes strewn throughout while also risking life and limb to rescue some of VEN's people. Very reminiscent of Astro Bot, these stragglers are often hidden, or at least in areas that are a little more treacherous to venture into. However, here in VEN, while saving your people is always optional, it is only to a point, as you are required to save enough to advance to new worlds, meaning rescuing these little shits becomes at times a risk-reward situation. Levels are sprawling but fairly linear with a definite forward momentum, but reveling in the scale and 3D of VR to add excitement to the levels that would otherwise be pretty straightforward. They do, however, branch off to alternate paths to tempt you with valuable collectibles, but they are, more often than not, much more hazardous. Where Astro and VEN deviate the most design-wise is where Astro really brought the player into the world and asked you to interact with the world, VEN puts you in more of an overseer role, slowly moving forward as VEN advances. And yeah, I did feel a bit disconnected with the world as a result, but I think that was also due to VEN VR Adventure just never making me a part of the game. Astro Bot had players shooting throwing stars, blowing on windmills, firing off grappling hooks, bashing our heads into breakable walls, and shooting water cannons, all to help Astro along his way. VEN has a few times where it asks us to throw some grenades or bash some blocks, but this is so rare that it often feels like an afterthought to what is a pretty straightforward 3D platformer that just happens to be in VR. The big difference being Astro Bot Rescue Mission probably couldn't have been done outside of VR. However, Astro Bot, for the most part, was a very easy game. Sure, there were some challenge levels, but if you were a seasonal platformer veteran, as most of us are, it rarely really challenged. VEN will, however, beat you down to your knees. Throughout the first 3 levels, everything was pretty basic as I cruised along breaking boxes and one-hitting enemies. Level 4, I started to find some enemies and jumps a little challenging, although not always from good game design. The issue was because the rolling camera that moved me forward had a tendency to move too far forward, making backtracking very difficult, resulting in really bad camera angles for judging jumps, and sometimes this wasn't even because of the camera, it was just the level design, making me feel like VEN VR Adventure was almost trying to raise its difficulty by using camera angles that made jumps hard to judge. Now don't get me wrong, usually it was just me sucking, and the marker for where VEN would land was certainly appreciated. But when the game played dirty, it was irritating. However, it wasn't a big deal because I had accrued over 30 lives and felt nothing when VEN would fall to his death. Levels 5 through 8, though, kicked me in the nuts and asked me if I wanted more, and I did. This is when the platforming kid in me kicked in and the obsession started. Enemies started to one-shot me and my ability to judge jumps at different angles of 3D were tested, to say the least. This is also when the game's tendency to play dirty started to really piss me off as I quickly blew through those 30 lives. Levels were restarted many times, and those side paths I mentioned that contained precious lives and collectibles quickly became calculated risks and not just boxes to check off. At this point, I was looking for the game to liven things up with some new abilities or gameplay mechanics, but that's not this game. Instead, like the original Crash, the game threw even tougher levels at me as I entered the last world and levels 9 through 12, and this is where things got even harder. Bottom line, don't let VEN VR Adventure fool you into thinking it's going to be a friendly little platformer that will leave you feeling good about yourself. Instead, it is a soul-sucking, bleeding thumb-inducing trial and error endurance test, and I loved it for that. As for replay value, well, finishing the game. But seriously though, each stage also has a time trial built into it with leaderboards, and like I mentioned, prior collectibles that you gather will open up bonus stages, so there's that as well. VEN VR Adventure is played seated and requires 2 motion controllers. VR sickness should be at a minimum, but for those who are very sensitive, the camera does move forward throughout the levels and it may cause a little bit of unease. And finally, that brings us to fun factor in my final review. In a world without Astro Bot rescue mission, VEN VR Adventure would have blown my mind. 3D platformers feel and work so well in VR, and VEN looks and plays very well. Unfortunately, I have played Astro Bot, and playing VEN felt like playing Sonic after playing Mario. And yeah, I was a Genesis kid, but damn it, Mario just had more imagination, ambitious, and fun. And Sonic was fast. Here in this comparable, Astro is Mario, and VEN is, well, it's hard. It's still good though, and beautiful to be inside, but it lacks personality, and it never really full embraces VR. As you guys know, I hate numbered review scores and instead rate games on a basis of buy it, burn it, or wait on it, along with a little info on who this might appeal to more. VEN VR Adventure isn't brilliant, but it is good, and what it lacks in ideas it does make up for with difficulty, meaning you need to decide what kind of platformer you are, because this will test your patience once you get past the first third of the game. If this doesn't scare you off and you like platformers, then yeah, I would say this is totally worth the asking price of $30, as it is a quality VR title that will likely keep you busy for 8 to 10 hours or even more. Just know going in, this is not Astro Bot, which likely isn't an issue if you only have PCVR and really don't know what you're missing. If you don't like platformers though, this likely is not going to win you over, as it really brings nothing new to the genre besides being in VR, even if it is a damn pretty game. Anyways guys, that's it for me. Thanks for stopping by. If you like this video, please hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more VR content from me, please consider subscribing, and for video updates, make sure you guys hit that bell icon. As always, I'll catch you guys on my next video.